to 2 years, and in 2 years we have covered almost every eminent writer of Nepal, and we are very privileged today to have Manjushree Thapa, Amtzis, and today's topic is writing poetry is especially important to me, being a poet, and you know that most of the conversations we have had so far have been focused on the better cousin of literature. Today we are going to talk about poetry, but before doing that, I'm sure you all know both Wayne and Manjushree, but I would like to formally introduce them to you. Wayne Amtzis was born in Corpus Christi, Texas in 1947. And grew up in Staten Island, New York. So you are one of the midnight children.
Okay.
He studied at Syracuse University and US Berkeley and received his master's in creative writing from San Francisco State University. He has lived and worked in Asia since 1976, and his writing has appeared internationally and in Nepali translation. He is the author of the poetry collection Sand Castle City, or Quicksand Nation, and Quicksand Nation, which is going to come, and the editor and co-translator of Days in the Life, translations from Nepali and Nepali Bhasa, Two Sisters, the poetry of Benju Sharma and Manju Kanchuli. Manju Kanchuli happens to be here. And From the Lake, Love, the poetry of Baniragiri. His photos of Kathmandu appear in the collection Flatline Witness, and a book-length series of his poems and photos, The Decisive,
The Unresolved.
The Unresolved. It's has been two books or one book. The Decisive or Decisive, The Unresolved / has been published in Studies in Nepali History and Society. He exhibited his street photographs at Siddharth Gallery in 2001, 2002 and 2004. That part we didn't know. He's a photographer as well. A student of Penor Rinpoche and Tulku Rinpoche, he practices and teaches meditation in Kathmandu, Nepal, under the guidance of
Sokni
Rinpoche, emphasizing the relation between meditation and creative expression. So, various facets of Wayne. I only knew the poet part, a photographer, and a meditation teacher part. I was not aware of, but I'm sure there is some connection. Manjushree Thapa, you all know, she was born in Kathmandu. She grew up in Nepal, Canada, and the United States, completing high school at the National Cathedral School in Washington, D.C. Was it in Maryland?
It's in DC.
The other, okay. And graduating with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Photography from the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence. Manjushree received an MFA in English from the University of Washington in Seattle in 1992. She began to write upon her return to Nepal in 1989. Her first book was Mustang Ode in Fragments, which was published by Himal Books in 1992. Is it the Himal South Asia Foundation?
It's before that was formed.
Okay.
Yeah.
In 1998, where she was a Fulbright Fellow studying under Maya Sonnenberg, Sean Wong, David Shields, and Charles Johnson. The novel she began as her MFA thesis was later published as The Tutor of History, Penguin India, 2001. She is author of Forget Kathmandu and Elegy for Democracy, a collection of short stories. Kill the Earth, also Penguin India, 2007. a collection of translations, The Country is Yours, Contemporary Nepali Literature, Print House, 2009, a biography, A Boy from Siklis, The Life and Times of Chandra Guru, Penguin India, 2009, and a novel, Seasons of Flight, Viking Penguin, 2010. She is currently working on a new fiction, non-fiction and literary translation. So we have very two eminent writers, and Wayne lives such a sublime life, hidden from the public gaze, that it took me 2 years to locate him in Kathmandu. And it has taken equal number of months to find Manjushree to be in Kathmandu. We met briefly last year, I think maybe 2 years ago, when you were here to launch your Aleph series of books. But afterwards we couldn't catch her. So today, my dear friends, we are very privileged to have both of them. Please give them big hands. And I request both of you to start your conversations. You have 45 minutes, and then we will have question and answer for 15 to 20 minutes, followed by refreshments. Thank you all for being with us today. Thanks.
Are these working? These are fine.
Hello, these are working?
This is on. Okay. All right. So Wayne and I had a little chat before this program to decide how to structure this, and I decided to take charge. And so I'll basically be asking a series of questions to Wayne, and also we decided to intersperse the talk with readings, because one of the things, as you'll see, about Wayne's poetry is that the voice is very important in his work. So for me, I feel like it's been very lucky for me as a writer, especially when I was young, to have met Wayne early on. I feel like I've learned so much from him, and whether it's in terms of my own writing or in terms of life also. I've learned a lot, but one of the main lessons that has really stayed with me is how to bring the breath and oxygen into language. So I wanted to start this talk off asking Wayne if he would read a poem, and then once we've got his voice in our ears, then we can discuss other issues.
I think I'm going to start out. I appreciate Manjushree, one poem, so you can hear the kind of writing I do. I'm a street poet. My poetry reflects what I see and experience walking in Kathmandu in this instance. And this poem is called Crossings. And it begins with a quote from an Arab poet, Abdul Wahab Abayati. And the quote is, "She appeared in my dreams. I said, a butterfly. Like lightning in clear sky. Like lightning in clear sky. Blue jeans, blue and silver shirt cling to the young woman holding tight, straddling man and bike. As they weave and thrust through the wheeze, spew, and backhand slap of Kathmandu traffic. Like lightning in clear sky, blue jeans, blue and silver shirt cling to the young woman holding tight, straddling man and bike as they weave and thrust through the wheeze, spew, and backhand slap of Kathmandu traffic. A slight rain aslant her skin. A low down glow suffuses face and eyes as lips pressed to neck she. As lips pressed to neck she. In that first take into the crossings, through the undertow, south, then west round the palace. I carried gloves, baton, gun. Spoken lures cast again deeper, farther, and like her lips and like her eyes rippling away. Take the white gloves on the police shuffling traffic. Take the white gloves on the police shuttling traffic, wiping the kerosene-laden air clean. And the rising, hesitant, thin black baton, unattuned to the jamming players, revved up mid-morning din. Or the rifle slung with the lift of the policewoman's chest, a stance that subdues all who turn west into the wide wing spread of a billboard, a wind-blown cape with its panorama of exploits, as if Our Lady Cop were a superhero, ready to swoop in and forestall all that follows. But hyped up seeing can't compete with the miraculous jug. The miraculous jug on the head of a tall, bony man in a sari, swaying in a group, swaying down the street. Thrusting forth, hands lifted in gulps, ready to break free into dance, to bring all of us into dance. But none, no glance dare stand down the sun-glint, malevolent eye of our villain, singular and unloved, ramping his motorbike up onto the sidewalk only to be stymied, slowed, stepped by their gay turning steps, so that he veers and abruptly thrusts head-on back through the stopped stream of cars, buses, and bikes. All for me traffic in images, no different than the blue butterfly. The blue butterfly before this day's dawn light that lit on my shoulder, then held still on the forgotten torque of my writing hand. Iridescent and pale, thin silver and blue lines alternate on wings, like powder, like phosphorus, like the sudden jump from light to dark. Was that the last she saw? Was that the last she saw? Our tide-swept heroine, holding tight on her way to, on her way from the last thing. This winged blue blur above, a shudder of sight, a murmuring lure, a lightning thrust of silence midst a riot of sound, bloodshot squawk of stone and bitter sky. There's no taking back, no second take, no room for the poet's game. Was that the last she saw? Or that side-swiping bike, that malevolent eye? My ears too far. Was that the last thing she saw? My vision too clouded, my language too deficient to say. Okay, that's crossings.
So, I know that you wrote this poem just this week.
No.
Tell me when you wrote this poem.
I wrote, is this working? Time I stopped writing poetry to about 2 months ago. During that time, 2000 to about 2010 to 2 months ago, I practiced what I call words for the wind. I wrote poems in my head, but I didn't write them down on the page. So this was the last poem I wrote for a number of years. And yesterday, having spoken to Manjushree, I thought it was a good time to pick this poem up again. By the way, it was a page longer, but 3 years off from writing poetry made me see right through what I had written, to see beneath the poem another poem. So very quickly I can sift through all the chaff. I finished it yesterday. Today I read it.
I wanted to ask, so we're going to come back to Words to the Wind.
For the Wind.
Words for the Wind. But I wanted to go back in time and come back chronologically. Can you tell me, so you came to Kathmandu with Judy in around 1976. You were already a poet then, you were already writing poetry. Can you tell me about the kind of work that you were doing then? And I know that from having known your work, I know that you revise a lot, and a lot of your old poems are constantly at work, and right now you've got a collection called Recluse in a Thoroughfare, which includes a lot of the old poems. So can you tell me about your early work and when you first came to Kathmandu?
For me, my work begins when I came to Asia. Whatever I wrote before then, I threw away. In the same way, I kind of turned my back on the United States. We drove from Berkeley to New York. We parked the car, and I've never ridden a car again. I was so happy to come to Asia where you don't need a car. Back then you didn't, especially in Kathmandu. So what I had written before, I forgot about. And coming to Asia changed my perspective on how I wanted to write and how I wanted to conceive things. And the reason we came to Asia was to study meditation and to meet Tibetan meditation teachers. And this we did in 1976. We met teachers, we began to study meditation, we began to practice meditation. At the same time, I fell in love with Kathmandu, the simplicity of it. It was a very simple place then. It was a very clear place to be. You were clear-minded being here. It was also a place where people were suffering and oppressed. And that slowly worked its way into my poetry. But initially, I wanted to write poems and to practice meditation. And fortunately, my wife was strongly interested in meditation. So when I loafed and wrote poems, she was learning how to meditate, and I was still playing with poetry and language. But over time, there was a dialectic that arose. Practicing meditation, writing poetry, practicing meditation, writing poetry, until the practice of meditation started to inform the writing of poetry.
Will you read Earn, which is from 1976? Is that one of your early poems?
You might like to stand. See everybody. So my earliest poetry is the one that I like so much. This is called Urns. As he molds wet clay into water jugs. As he molds wet clay into water jugs, the potter spins a tire levered into a sunken mound at his doorstep. Beside him, his wife, her hands weathered, purposeful, shapes spouts, lips, and handles. Urns as wide round as a woman with child stand in a circle radiating out from the crouched, intent couple. From among these I choose, from among these their offspring, you choose an orphan with delicate neck, and I another, ample and full-bodied, for storing water we will haul from the village well. That first morning in the farmhouse below Kopan Monastery, spider necklaces slung across the path glistened, draping us in a moist, scented light. The urn we set in a dark corner, 3/4 full, with a clay pot of yogurt or a fresh jug of milk cooling within. The orphan we later carried, each in turn in the crook of our arms, along the paddy ridges, through and around bamboo groves back to the city. The all-seeing, clear blue eyes of the Bodhanath Stupa taking us in on that moonlit parting night.
it's pretty clear that the voice in Wayne's work is really a part of his process, and it's a part of the work. I mean, you can, when I read his poems now, I hear his voice reading them for me. It's something very particular. I wanted to then talk about, so over the years, you've been a meditator, and you've been a writer, poet, and the consciousness of the poet and the consciousness of the meditator, I sort of wanted to ask you about what the relationship between the two of them has been. If you could talk about the work that you did in another collection, which is Skyladder's Phantom Exits. How did that come about, and what's the relationship in that between the consciousness, one kind of consciousness, the poet's consciousness, and the meditator's consciousness?
You know, the meditator's consciousness is the one to be preferred, I'm sorry to say. The poet's consciousness is grasping. The poet grasps after images. The poet also is enthused by his own voice. He wants to hear the sound of his own voice. So the ego is in play. The ego can be also in play in meditation. But nonetheless, meditation is a quieting and a sharpening and a stepping back, whereas poetry is an expression and a stepping forward. And the two meet, for me, with the concept or the idea or the practice of listening. I speak now, but I also listen. I privilege listening. Listening is the cardinal virtue, not speaking. So the poet has to listen. He listens internally, and he listens externally. And the poet also works with images, so he has to see. He sees internally, and he sees externally. And the meditator allows the poet to bridge seeing and saying. At least this is how I use meditation in relationship to poetry. To bridge seeing and saying. Do you want me to say more, or do you have something here?
You said when we were talking earlier about this program, something that I noted down, which is, quote, poetry is my sadhana and meditation is my muse. What does that mean?
Poetry is my sadhana and meditation is my muse. Sadhana is a practice. So poetry is a practice. It's a form. It's a form I take up. It has limits. I work with the limits. Meditation is more open. In order to practice poetry, from my view, one needs inspiration and openness. Meditation provides the inspiration, the openness, in fact, the basis for expression. So if one meditates, one steps back from the world. If one writes poetry, one projects. In order to project, one needs a source to project from. Meditation provides that source. For me, I'm not talking prescriptively here. I'm talking descriptively.
Will you talk about Skyladder's Phantom Exits and the work? What was that work? That was poetry that came out of a time when you were meditating very intensively. I mean, you still do, but very much related to meditation and poetry coming together.
Is working? Okay. And so, over that time, the practice of meditation changes, and how one meditates changes. So, initially, the relationship between poetry and meditation had to do with walking. Later on, the relationship had to do with a deeper kind of thing, of self-awareness of the mind. The collection she mentioned is a collection I began in 1976. And when I would meet teachers, my way of responding to them was to write a poem. So I would dedicate a poem to a teacher I met. If I met another teacher, I would dedicate a poem. And it went on like this for a number of years. And then when I started having students, I would communicate with them through writing. And then I would write them poems in response to their questions. My mode of answering was poetry because it's concise and it's to the point. So that collection she mentions is mostly, actually almost every poem is dedicated to somebody. So I'm going to read one of those poems, an early poem from 1979. And this is dedicated to Sharma Rinpoche. You might not know Sharma Rinpoche, but he was recently cremated here, and it took a while for him to be allowed into the country. He has a very close connection with the mountain communities in Nepal. This is called Lotus-Born Sunbread, and this takes place in Swayambhu. We lived in Swayambhu in 1979. Second visit to Nepal. Lotus-born sunbread. As day breaks on Swayambhu Hill, immovable stone decapitated by the mist jumps from its god shapes. As day breaks on Swayambhu Hill, immovable stone decapitated by the mist jumps from its god shapes. Or is this just a band of monkeys roaming the forest, haloed in sun-distilled air? Or my monkey mind tripping on a prayer-beaded Om Mani Padme Hum? Lifted this morning by Sharma Rinpoche's presence, I glide down the steep stone steps from the stupa, entreated by grasping hands and an insistent whine. 1 rupee, bakshish gift. Cutting through the arc of my kora, my circling of the shrine, I turn home as the sun lifts its palms and unmet in praise. I turn home as the sun lifts its palms and unmet in praise turns a collective fist upon damp, crumbling walls, intent to rouse the Hamitic, reclusive town, intent to rouse the hermetic, reclusive town from its futile, feudal sleep. That's Lotus-Born Sunbread.
You know, for me, when I got to know you as a writer, the tension that I found interesting in your work also present in your work. So for me, you know, because that's my bias, I'm interested in the social and political situation that we're in. I think I responded to probably that aspect of your work most strongly at the start and came around to understanding the importance of meditation within it. You have a poem collection coming out in December called The City on Their Backs.
City on Their Backs.
City on Their Backs. And a lot of the photographs and poems of Kathmandu that comprise this collection are up on your website, which is photopoems.com. Is that it?
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of that work. The book is coming out in December. I wanted to ask you about that book because that was, as I understand it, part of your walking meditation practice, walking through Kathmandu, using photography and poetry as a way of meditating on what you were seeing?
You could say it that way.
How would you say it?
I was writing poetry. If you look at the way Lotus-Born Sunbread ends, it ends with the mythic reclusive town waking it from its feudal sleep. So when I first came here, I came here for reasons of being a practicing Buddhist and learning how to meditate. But being in Kathmandu became very clear to me quite soon that this was a country where there was a lot of oppression. And so I wanted to somehow characterize that oppression. And so I started to bring that into my poetry. And the way I characterized it was simply by depicting what I saw. Because I'm an outsider. Who am I to say anything or judge anything? So I wanted to depict what I saw in such a way as if you heard the poem or read it, you would be drawn to a certain kind of conclusion. And the way I practiced meditation then in relationship to my poetry was to do walks, to do walking meditation, and not to write while walking, simply to walk, to focus on my breathing, and to learn to see with a wide angle, not to focus, but to see with a wide angle. So many images would come and stay with me. And then later on, I would sit down and I would collate the images. I would put the images together. Initially, very brief images like sketches. Subsequently, the sketches piled up and sketches became poems.
Will you read question mark?
Question mark. The poetry sitting on the back and the backs is photograph poetry. Every poem is a photo. The poem is a photo. It means every poem is tied to a place, like a photograph would be tied to a place. Every poem depicts, more or less every poem depicts one person or a couple of people, their portraits. And I wrote the poetry first in the 80s. And in the late 80s, I started to take photographs in the same neighborhoods where I was writing poetry. I was going to and from work. We taught at the English Language Institute, downtown Kathmandu. So morning and evening, walking back and forth, plenty of time to see the city in different kind of light. And again, one walks, one breathes, one feels the body walking, one doesn't focus here, 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 one absorbs. But if you walk the same route every day, you're going to see the same things over and over again. You don't have to zero in. You don't have to name it and claim it with language just yet. You simply let the images come to you. And then at another time, you sit down and you write them out. So this poem, question mark, actually I wrote relatively recently when I was putting the book together. I decided I'd add one or two more poems in the same style that I wrote back in the 80s. So this is a relatively new poem, written in the style of the 80s. It's called Question Mark. Bent forward, strap to brow. Bent forward, strap to brow, torso a question mark from head to spine. Torso, body, a question mark from head to spine. Flip-flop, bare legs slowly pumping along. Bend forward, strap to brow, torso a question mark from head to spine. Flip-flop, bare legs slowly pumping along. 5 metal suitcases tiered into a leaning tower twice your length. When you reach their destination, when you reach their destination, will you lie down? Will you lie down, stretch, and let it all go? Will you lie down, stretch, and let it all go? Or turn round, bone bent beneath a shadow load? The answer asked of you. The answer asked of you to pile on someone else's needs and wants, to pile on someone else's needs and wants for your tarnished dime's worth of labor.